Here we are for another episode of Integral Podcast. And today I have actually a guest that I'm looking forward to really delving a little bit deeper into the subject of trauma about. But first, Andre, please introduce yourself. Who are you? That's my always opening question.
Yeah.
straight for the
Oh, yeah.
straight for the depth of it.
So yeah, thanks, Jason. I'm Andre Duquemin. For the last 20 odd years, I've worked in the field of mind and body health, working as an osteopath for since 2001, and then really starting to work with trauma and high performance, and really what gets in the way of people being able to perform at their highest sort of peaks. And then really just looking at, over the last 5 years, working more with executives, professionals, business owners who deal with, working through anxiety, working through burnout, really sort of struggling to come to terms with, their sort of lower performance and how they can go around fixing that. So that's my work. And then as a guy, I live in the beautiful sunny island of Guernsey, and have a family, have a wife and a daughter, and a dog. So yeah, it's good. Life's good.
Fantastic. It's good to hear, that you're doing well in all this what seems to be, quite challenging time for a lot of people. How has 2020 affected your business and you in general?
Yeah, I think it's been a crazy time, hasn't it? And it's I mean, from a personal business level, I have a fair bit of corporate work, and so my corporate work dropped off a cliff in March. Literally had people just suddenly say, "Oh no, I can't do this work, can't do this work, can't do this work." So from a personal level, 6 weeks of really reduced income. But then that sort of came back, and organically from my own personal business level, is pretty much back to normal. But from a sort of a personal, sort of just generally what's going on in life, it's been crazy. And it's a really, I think, because I work in trauma and because I'm aware of the mind and body thing, and particularly, really that embodied perspective, really recognizing that the virus is what our nervous system doesn't like. It's novel, It's unpredictable, it's uncontrollable, all the things that our nervous system just goes crazy for. So I think I have a bit of a bonus in the fact that I know this area quite well. So I recognize, even in myself, the need to take time out in fact, I'm taking a few days out with my family in the next couple of weeks, just to slow down, just to reconnect, just to get back out in nature, just to have some laughter, because I think we've all been overwhelmed. We've all been, probably much more affected than we really realize, a lot of us. A lot of us have just sort of said, "Oh, we just need to get on and pull through," and that sort of stuff. But actually, I think taking stock, and certainly with my clients, I recognize that they've struggled. I think particularly as things have started to come a little bit out, as we started to move out of lockdown a little bit and things got a little bit looser, that gung-ho, I have to keep going for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks. And when that starts to loosen, I think everyone sort of relaxes and their bodies just go, "Wow, this is really, I need some time to look after myself." So yeah, so that's my personal reflection.
Okay, well, that's similar with me in the sense that it was quite a shock in a sort of way that it's a sort of different type of shock, I would say, and I'm not sure whether that's trauma. And so I would like to actually ask you, how do you see, what's your definition of trauma? Not necessarily dictionary definition, but like how do you describe to me what you think of as trauma?
So I like to use the phrase undigested life experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So things happen to us in our lives that we don't fully digest for whatever reason. So, let's say as a 12-year-old, most of your days went past day by day without any sort of real issue. Then suddenly one day you're attacked by a dog or something, most of those days that you've had just pass by fine. There's nothing really going on. You're filing all that sort of your day-to-day experience, you're filing it away. Then all of a sudden something big happens. I mean, we can go into the minutiae about, that I call big T trauma and little T trauma. But let's just say the big T trauma is something like you get attacked by a dog or something like that. And it's a big, emotional, overwhelming experience that as a 12-year-old, you do your best to to deal with, but it leaves a resonance in your system. So it leaves a charge in the system, so that 20 years later, when suddenly you're startled by another dog, you'll have exactly the same reaction as you did as a 12-year-old, but 20 years later. That's not a conscious reaction, it's a subconscious reaction. Something has changed. You haven't fully digested that experience. So our most experiences get digested fully. The things that don't leave charges in the system, and that's really where we're interested in. That's the undigested life experience that I'm interested in working with.
And I guess that with the big and small T trauma, big T is like heavy duty embodiment, big types of shocks like sexual abuse, childhood abuse, all that kind of stuff. And small T might be like I suddenly lost a job, or
to a point. So a better way of thinking of it is big T is like a sudden sharp onset of something. So losing your job out of the blue would actually probably be a big T trauma.
Okay.
It's like it's a shock. Little T trauma would be like something like being neglected, subtle. As a child, maybe you've been brought up in a family where your needs are neglected, and that lasts for a long time. It's that sort of death by 1,000 cuts. You have that more and more, just small things happen every day. So, you're not getting your needs met, you're not getting looked after. In an adult life, it might be a relationship that's just slowly starting to splinter and slowly starting to, you're starting to have those sort of, that trauma, small traumatic sort of processes in the relationship. And so you don't need to get too hung up on that, but basically what the effect is that something very, very massive has a slightly different effect than the long-term neglect situation, say. So they're just worth knowing the difference between when you're actually working with clients.
Yeah. And so how does trauma then affect people's lives? It's pretty much like everyone traumatized.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's part of the biggest thing that the work I do, I think, is probably recognizing. So a lot of my clients come to see me and they'll say, I don't necessarily feel that I've had anything bad happen to me, and I tend not to talk in terms of trauma all the time anyway, because people will sometimes close off from that. They don't feel they've had any trauma, but they'll say, what we do, we compare ourselves to other people. So we'll always put we'll say, well, I'm not as bad as this person. This person had a lot of a worse life than I did, so I can't. My own feelings are not validated.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really the problem, is when we're starting to recognize that my situation isn't as bad as somebody else, so therefore I don't suffer. And that's, so yes, we all have had, of course we've all had trauma in some ways. Everyone from birth has had some stuff happen to them, even if you think you've had the most perfect childhood, the most perfect teenage years and adulthood. I mean, I've never heard anyone that said they've had the perfect everything, but if you do think you've had that, then the most likely thing is that you've just hidden it away pretty much, and that there will have been stuff happen to you. And it's not like it's necessarily bad things. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be there forever. If you've been brought up in an alcoholic father or something, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be affecting you every day of your life in that sense. It can, but it's just it's the small effects that it has in the background, the small sort of stuff that affects you as you move through life. So yeah, we've all definitely suffered from trauma in some ways, no doubt at all. Everyone is affected by it.
So what then do you see as a sort of main differential between, let's say, someone who comes into you with this trauma, whether they're like identify that as trauma, or they kind of generally might not think, well, something's wrong with me, but not sure what's the kind of core differential between someone coming into you and then someone sort of finishing a process with you? I'm not sure if you have like set pieces that you do, or you kind of do something quite like custom with your customers.
Yeah, so it's a bespoke. So I sort of have a mixture of bespoke one-to-one work with online training, because I think you need both to really give the maximum benefit. I think knowing the science is really important for this stuff. So yeah, people will generally, the process is the same really for anyone that comes in, for anyone that, whatever they're going through, the process is the same. It's really starting to recognize that most of us get stuck in our heads. We get stuck in this thinking brain a lot of the time. We don't connect with our feeling brain. We don't connect with our survival brain, down in our body. Our conscious brain is takes in 5 to 7 sort of bits of information at any time and communicates to us in thoughts, but the subconscious takes in all the, takes in 90% of the information is coming from the subconscious, and it's communicating to us in physical sensations and in feelings and emotions. And so if we're not really if our vocabulary around that sort of area is stuck, then we tend to get ourselves stuck as well. So the processes are similar. It's like how to slow down our thinking brain, how to recognize where some of the thoughts are negative, but really starting to connect deeply into that sort of body, getting that embodied sort of perspective. So working with feelings, working with physical sensations, working with emotions, that sort of stuff.
And so the kind of the pre and end result is what's the kind of difference? So people come in feeling a certain way, and people come out feeling what way?
Yeah, so I'll just give you an example of someone I'm working with at the moment. So obviously I won't give her a real name, but so this person works in education and has about 7 weeks through an 8-week program that we're working with, and she came into the program feeling very anxious, very overwhelmed, pretty quick to tears, pretty much feeling that she was sort of not connecting with friends as well as she could do, feeling paranoid, feeling isolated, feeling that she couldn't really connect with people, and really didn't know why. So the process for her is to start to get her to recognize, firstly, the physical sensation of anxiety, firstly the physical sensation of feeling isolated, starting to rather than it being this sort of thing that she doesn't recognize, she just gets overwhelmed by anxiety. You can start to say, this is what this process is. So when you feel anxiety, this is what's happening to you. You can start to notice it, and all of a sudden, rather than it being the subject of her life where it's running her everyday life, it becomes an object. She can take this anxiety, she can look at it, she can go, oh yeah, there's that anxiety. I recognize now it's a physical sensation. It's a buzz of adrenaline coming through. It makes my heart race. It makes my pulse, my heart's going fast, and all the blood's going to my organs, preparing me to run away. My breath rate's going up. So all of a sudden, rather than just think she's a victim to that, not that she's a victim, but rather than think she's helpless, she can actually start saying, actually, I'm in control of this. And so she starts to recognize over the first 2 or 3 weeks, she started to recognize this was the situation. This is the physical thing that's going on. She started to recognize where her triggers are. So we started to do some work a little bit around her relationship with her parents, for example, and her relationship with friendships and what had happened in some of her early years around schooling and that sort of stuff. And as we started to do that, she started to get this understanding of where her triggers were and why those triggers might be there, and then gave her loads of techniques to start calming that down. So lots of breath work, lots of working with the heart, lots of working with negative thought processes, just really sort of from a neurophysiological point of view to try and get her system back online. Because at the end of the day, this is just a physical, not just, I don't want to categorize it as something that doesn't have as meaning. It's obviously, people that are going through it is really difficult. It's a horrible thing, but it is generally a neurobiological process that they're going through. They're just not aware of how to deal with it. None of this is really sort of that far-fetched outside of, it's a very science framework of looking at this, very science-based framework. And we know how to work with the body. We know how to work with the gut. We know how to work with the heart. We know how to work with thought processes, emotions, physical sensations, so that, the top-down, bottom-up approach, which a lot of the trauma books talk about, is massively powerful in this work. So yeah, does that sort of answer your question? Oh, so yeah, and so by the end of the session, she, by coming up to the last session, she now feels so much less anxious, so much more in her body. She's starting to connect into her body much more. She's doing practices where she's feeling her seat on the chair. She's feeling her, she's looking around. She's getting her bearings. She's feeling, taking time before meetings to take her, to get her physically sort of settled. And it just makes all the difference. So she understands her process now. She understands when she's out there, and she has probably 70-80% less anxiety. When she does have anxiety, she knows how to deal with it. So it's really just taking someone from feeling overwhelmed, full of anxiety, pretty much at the lowest ebb, and over this process of self-knowledge and self-awareness and physical embodied, a whole embodiment takes a long time, more than 8 weeks, but the start of getting this embodied sort of idea moving forward.
Yeah, and I suppose somebody could plot some sort of a chart where there's a sort of like a, maybe, I don't know, reverse exponential return on investment, that like if you're really swimming in anxiety and maybe depression and so on, and you start and you've never done any of the breath work and meditation and so on, with the first time when you start doing that, it's like immediate sense of like return on
Absolutely.
investment. But then there is a kind of like the real kind of high hanging fruits require a lot more work for like perfection and perfecting of the process, and
Absolutely.
only a handful will ever get there, because probably they'll give up and go, I feel fine now, I feel, basically, to my mind, this is perfect. So talk to me a little bit about, so that, because one thing that's interesting to me about you is the scientific and the rational angle of approach to this.
Hmm.
Uh, so, but then there is the kind of, my profession has been over the years user experience design, and user experience design is designing experiences as a product. So for example, I don't know, let's say I can use scissors as an example, saying that all of these are scissors. There is a kind of feel to them when I put them on my hands and when I'm using them and so on. Some scissors you just know you don't like using, and some you do. And it's like, the ones that you do like, we would say they have a great user experience. Okay, and it's
Hmm.
kind of like why Apple products are so,
Yeah.
sought for versus another laptop that's just a laptop. So the idea here being that experience isn't necessarily just a rational thing, or is it? I'm testing you with this question. So,
Hmm.
what is the rationale of your approach? That's the question.
So you mean rationale in terms of where it's based in sort of from a science perspective or a
Yeah,
mind
what
body?
would be like, if I was to like, what are you basing your
Hmm.
practice on?
Yeah, so it's very much the mind and the body. So the link between mind and body is so powerful and so undeniably. In some ways, you can't separate the mind and the body. They are two parts of the same thing. And so for me to have someone doing talk therapy, or someone doing breath work, or someone doing yoga, or someone taking all these little bits and pieces and sort of separating them off into individualized components is sort of okay, but it misses the overall whole. It misses the holistic sort of way of viewing this. And holistic is an overdone word to a point, but with mind and body, you can't overdo it in some ways. The idea of bringing all these pieces together, and then if we wanted to expand out into what you go mind and body, and then you could say what's the expansion and how do we fit in the universe. That's another deeper question, but from a basic point of view, it's how the mind and body connect, how we have these, from my perspective, these three major energy centers: the gut, the heart, and the head. And how all of those three energy centers need to have they have different control mechanisms. So the gut is concerned with safety, the heart is concerned with connection, and the head is concerned, the neocortex, is concerned with respect, and how we fit in society, and how we fit in with logic and meaning and purpose and all that sort of stuff. So if you don't have a balance between those three things, you're going to struggle. And so if you just work at one of those levels, you're always going to struggle. Whereas if you can work at all three in tandem, then you've got serious clout behind you.
So what, in your sort of view and approach, what comes first, body or the mind? Is
You
the
can't
mind
split them, I don't
the, the
think.
the governor? So what like,
No,
how
it's
does
not.
it, how does the kind of, explain to me how you're thinking in your mind's eye, how the process of, let's say a process of, I'm going to make a cup of coffee, what happens in respect to mind body, in an
Mm.
order of kind of rationalization of that process?
Great question. I mean, to start with, most of that's subconscious. So if you've never made a cup of coffee before, you have to go online and go to YouTube and you go, okay, so how do I get a cup from okay, what do I do with a cup? You get some coffee, okay. So because you've made potentially several thousand cups of coffee in your time, most of that process is subconscious. So for example, you making a cup of coffee at the same time, you could probably be listening to a podcast, thinking about the email that you're going to write to a client, and planning what you're going to do, what you need from a shopping list. So making the cup of coffee is generally a subconscious process. So there'll be an initial desire to have a cup of coffee, which might actually be just because it's 7 o'clock. You might not want one. It might just be, 7 o'clock, monkey has
But
go to
is
go
that
to the cafe
desire,
kitchen.
so is that desire a physical or a mental thing? Is that the mind making a decision, or sort of calling it? Even when we say subconscious, where is that subconscious sitting? Is it like behind me? Is it in my body? Is it in the
Oh yeah,
gut?
so
Is
it's in
like,
your, yeah.
yeah. So do you think of that as a physical thing, or a mental thing? It's like some sort of nebulous thought thing from the head, let's say, or wherever thoughts come from. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's just use the habit. So let's use a habit of a 7 o'clock in the morning cup of coffee. So you get up, go to the bathroom, come downstairs, you automatically think, so this is a habituated pattern of behavior, right? So 7 o'clock, excuse me, 7 o'clock, I always have a cup of coffee. So the brain goes, it's 7 o'clock, time for coffee. That's the initial signal down into the body, which probably sends signals of saying, oh yeah, we like coffee. Yeah, coffee makes me feel good, just because that's what we like, that sitting on the sofa at 7 o'clock. So at that stage, then, so the brain has sort of given a command to the body, to the subconscious, and the subconscious is doing its thing. And then the subconscious is, you just end up getting away and making your cup of coffee. But that is an that's an electric thought in your head, triggered by neurons that have fired together and wired together over many years. That neural network triggers the release of chemicals, which trigger the release of neurotransmitters into your body, and that will fire you up to actually be motivated to go and make the coffee. And then there's all those processes of actually the physical manifestation of what that looks like, in terms of actually going and making the coffee, pressing the button, or putting the kettle down, whatever it is. And so there's a whole, but those are habitual behaviors that are just created over time, and they are all literally mind and body linking together. So it's the electric thought with the magnetic sort of chemical reaction in the body, creating an electromagnetic experience, basically, that ends up with you having a cup of coffee in your hand. Yeah.
Interesting, because I keep wanting to illustrate a flow of these processes, because when you say the mind or subconscious mind, I think there's been lots of discussions and debates around whether that's first coming from the body, right? As in, like, the body is sending some sort of signal that's like, I need coffee, or I want coffee, and then the mind is like interpreting that subconscious signal, where that's coming from the physical body. And then, because the mind isn't necessarily consciously aware of itself, right, it's like, well, I'm just acting on what the body urges are, right? And then
Yeah.
and then I'm thinking that I thought that first.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and all
Completely.
that. So
Yeah, so you could absolutely. So you could definitely argue that. So you could argue that the body comes first, right? You could argue that the desire to have the coffee is from the subconscious, which generally I think you'd say most science would suggest that most of the subconscious is bodily. It's in the emotions and in the physical sensations. That's where you find this. So yeah, you could definitely say that trigger is much more about Pavlov's dog. You've built up that behavior, and so there's a subconscious. You're not consciously maybe choosing to go and have that, saying, I'm just going to have another coffee, because that would be creating the same, every day you'd be having to create new pathways, and you're not really doing that. You're living off the old pathways in many ways. Yeah.
And so there's two things that I would love to quiz you on. It's more like a sort
Hmm.
of quiz. I'm learning here. Uh,
Hmm.
so one thing is, what is emotion in your sort of worldview? Let's just tackle that one first, and then the
Hmm.
second one is around. Um, let's just deal with emotion first. What's
Yeah.
emotion in all of this?
So for me, emotion is at its base level, it's chemical reaction in the body that we've grown to associate with a particular feeling, which we either like or hate. So let's just take a very simple example again, using just using an example of someone about to go on stage and give a public talk. So when you're about to, let's say you're sitting in the wings of the stage, you've peeked around the corner, you've seen there's 1,000 people all waiting for you to come on in the next 5 minutes. That, with all pretty much 100% of people, that you're going to get a rush of adrenaline. That is going to be an experience that is unlikely to make you feel calm and cool and ready for a lie down. Most of the time you're going to be flushing your body with adrenaline. At that stage, that adrenaline gives you a physical sensation. And that physical sensation, if you are sort of fairly confident about going on stage, will be felt as excitement. But if you're fairly unconfident about going on stage, will be felt as anxiety or as fear. So the emotion comes as a reaction to a habituated reaction, again, to how you feel about being in that situation. So, in that situation, one person could be feeling completely so excited, I can't wait to get on stage, a little bit anxious, a little bit nervous, but I'm buzzed up. Someone else could be feeling completely petrified. So the physical sensations you're having and how you associate what you associate is about to happen with you gives you an emotion. So likewise, so let's just say, I don't know, using the example of someone who's been brought up by an alcoholic father, let's just say that person is in a situation where a man breathing alcohol on them might trigger an old pattern, and so they might find that emotion of someone coming towards them with alcohol breath completely horrible, whereas someone else might not find it the same. So the emotion comes up based on the experiences that we've had, and based on the chemical reactions. So how we experience the neurochemicals that are going through our bodies, and how we react to them, and what's been our old patterns, what's been our old experiences around there, and that will give us the emotions associated with that.
So the second question was around, if we do take this approach that it's body first, and I'm still not sure myself. I was like, one day I wake up and it's like it's mind first, then the next day
Yeah, of course it is.
yeah,
Yeah.
and then next day I can go, no, it's a body first. But probably truth is that both are true. It just depends
Well,
on
for
what.
me, I'd say you can't split them. It's very, very that one can't function without the other. So you can't say it's mind or body first. They are both functioning at the same time for all intents and purposes. I mean,
Okay.
I think some of the research shows there's a 0.002 or something difference in time from a thought triggering an emotion or something. So there is some scientific research out there, but as far as I'm concerned, they're basically the same. They're functioning together. And so the emotion obviously is experienced. You can't think an emotion. So you
Yeah.
can't think, you can think angry thoughts, but you can't think anger. You can feel anger. So emotions felt in the body that you can't, I mean, that's just the way it is.
Yeah. But in most stuff that I've studied and
Mm.
researched, it's usually thought, and it's perhaps operative word here, that thought arises first and then emotion follows
Yeah.
from thought.
Because that's that's the neural networks in the brain triggering the release of chemicals, and the chemicals are released into the body. So yeah, I
Okay.
mean, you definitely agree with that.
But then what
But
is, yeah, what's
there is some research. Sorry, there is some research that actually shows, so for example, some of the heart math research around
Mhm.
around the heart. And so taking it to a little bit of a deeper level, some of the research with heart math came out a few years ago, and it's been backed up by many studies since then. If you showing, so they basically strap people to this, to lots of electrodes, and then have them having images played, images that are either very shocking or very nice, so like bunny rabbits versus a human skull or something. And they'd flick these every sort of 3 seconds. There'd be another one flicked, another one flicked, another one flicked. And obviously, initially, when your body reacts, oh, it's going to, it's a shocking image or a nice image, a shocking image, a nice image, and the body was reacting, a little bit after the stimulus was shown. But actually, what happens after about 15 or 20 of these iterations is that the body starts to guess beforehand what's coming up. The heart, what they think is happening is that the heart is starting to settle into the field. Now we're going into a whole different level of conversation. Mm-hmm. The heart is settling into a field that is non-local, and it's actually being able to tell the difference between, it's predicting whether the next image is of a bunny rabbit or of a skull. It's actually, and they were seeing people's milliseconds before the image would come up. They were seeing the individual's response, bodily response, either as fear or as love, fear or love, before the image was shown to them. Mm-hmm. So it's really not simple. We're trying to simplify something that's massively complex here. Yeah. So I don't want to sort of say there is a whole heap of, so yes, thought comes first. And yes, there is an emotional response or a physical response to that, but there are so many other things coming into play. Yeah, so many other
super
influences
complex
around you.
Yeah,
it's super complex. Yeah.
And so then, I know I'm potentially chucking at you some questions that there is like nobody on the planet has an answer to, and that perhaps there's like 20 research institutes alone working on this stuff. But it's a sort of, and I wonder about this like all the time, but let's say if our decisions are being made on these kind of grooves, synaptic grooves that we've embedded into our brains, right? Where does the actual new decision, new thought come from? If all thoughts come from these kind of synaptic grooves, how come suddenly one day we kind of go, I'm going to have tea instead of coffee, and I've never had tea before, right? Why does that happen? What's your kind of the theory on it?
Yeah, so I would think, so new behavior, any sort of new choice to behave in a different way, generally will need a stimulus from somewhere, or else you just keep on repeating the same pattern. So I think the estimate is, and it's a bit of an overquoted, bit of pop psychology in some ways, but I think they reckon something like 95%, by the time you get to 35 years of old, 95% of the thoughts and feelings you have on a day-to-day basis are exactly the same as the day before. So you do have a 5% window, right? You have a 5% of the stuff is coming in a new way. So let's just say I'm sitting at a table having my coffee, and then someone gets served this wonderful mint tea next to me, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, mint tea, I've heard that's good for you. And so you have some new information coming in that and you make an executive decision. The thinking brain goes, oh, it tries to logically and work out this maybe is a good thing and a nice thing to get involved in, and so we'll do that. Sorry, there's a plane going overhead, as you can hear.
It's fine.
But yeah, and also, oh, I can, maybe there's been a judgment when I see this other person drinking their mint tea. They seem to be really happy. Oh, and they're good looking, and they've got their, they're obviously, life is good for them, so I'm going to associate myself with this new mint tea. So behavioural change you need to have an impulse to make that change. So there has to be so for me, it would probably normally be something on the outside. I'm sort of making this up as I go along, because I haven't necessarily thought about it in this level, but for me, there'll be something on the outside, a trigger from the outside, whether it's a book, something that you've seen in real life, or someone else's experience, and you go, that'd be interesting. This is a situation that maybe I'd like to change myself. And so then that's your 5% window where that new behavior or that new thought can come in. And if that new thought is one that you put enough weight behind and that you really enjoy and you really connect to it, then you can create new behaviors on the back of that. But what most of the time happens, sadly, is that we get a new behavior that comes in, and it feels like good for a few days, but then those 95% of the this massive, these subconscious patterns that we've created just take over and get us back to normal. So when I say normal, it's like a normal life that we've created. It doesn't mean that it's a good way. It just means it's what we're used to. It's a comfort zone.
Yeah. And in terms of in your view, and maybe even in your practice, what is the role of things like self-awareness, or I tend to avoid the word consciousness, but personal consciousness, as well as spirituality in what you're doing?
Yeah, great question. So awareness is massive. The ability to put your awareness on something is massive. So just at a point, so for me to be able to say, I can, a little bit like this example I used before of the lady the woman, my client, who could suddenly put her awareness on her anxiety. So there's a sense of that you're becoming aware of yourself. So you're not living in this, I talk about people, I think, people are either sort of awake to what's going on inside them, or they're living on autopilot, and we all flip between those two day to day. But so the awareness is key. So self-awareness is key in a contained mind and body. That's one way of looking at it. What happens outside of that mind, from a spirituality perspective, is a massive framework that is so important for everybody to have. It's like if you think about, for me again, if you think about this, the gut, the heart, and the head as these three major energy centers of our mind and our body, what's beyond that, that's where the spirituality comes in. And that is massively important for everyone. In the process work that I do, in the processes that I use, it's not something that we teach in our shorter programs, but it is something that we, in longer year-long mastermind sort of stuff, we definitely come into that, because it's essential. You have to have an awareness of your place in something bigger than just you. I think if you're only functioning on your own self, then you lose something. You lose a connection. We aren't isolated beings. We are, if you expand it out to the whole, we're not isolated from, we are part of one unique ecosystem, and we're not separate. So, and the experience that I've had with literally hundreds of clients is that when they connect to that, their lives are in some way enriched. But what that looks like for each individual is very different. So happily, I've got clients who are Christians, I've got clients who are Muslims, I've got clients who have call themselves atheists, but they can connect to something. I haven't actually yet had anyone who hasn't connected to anything. But I guess there are, Richard Dawkins, and there are guys out there who literally say there is nothing but material matter, and that's all we are. We born, we die. There's nothing else other than, and the mystery of the universe, which is pretty mysterious, right? So,
well, I mean, like Richard Dawkins seems to, connect to the spirit of Darwin,
of nature,
all the time, and Darwin, Charles Darwin, because he seems to quote him a lot, like as though Darwin knew everything, even though Darwin said, "I don't know everything." But so, is the way forward for society a scientific one, like a emotional one, spiritual one, or some sort of integrative way forward?
Yeah, it's integrated. It has to be integrated. So I'm very aware that what I teach to my clients is a way to give. So my clients are on the ENR, the accident and emergency. They're on they've just been wheeled in, and they need people to get them up and out again. But that doesn't mean that at some stage they're not going to need the help of nutrition and exercise, and so from that analogy, the work I do is really about taking people, recognizing how powerful the mind and body connection is, and how they can become much more aware of what's going on in their body, and that will really help them move through life. But beyond that, a wider level, there's so much more depth to it than we can even possibly articulate. I think, and I'm very aware that the role I play is a specialist role that doesn't, like, it's impossible to fulfill to be someone for every aspect of everyone's lives. It's not realistic. And so, yeah, that's the answer to your question is that it's so multi-layered, so multi-leveled, but it has to be integrated. And I know both you and I have sort of got a bit of an affinity with Ken Wilber's sort of integral approach, and I think the work he's put together is, and not just him but hundreds of others, is just stunning. And the idea of how we can integrate ourselves into this thing we call life is just multifaceted, multi-layered, and beautiful in all of that variety. That's the magic. That's the magic. And so the problem is that for me, the problem is that so many people get lost in their external circumstances all the time. And so what we're trying to do is trying to slow down, take your focus away from the external, come to focus on the inside. And once you start to focus on the inside, there is just this world of possibility there for you, and the work with me is that first step.
So do you see that people change over their lifetimes, or is it impossible to change? Because I recently heard this talk
you know
from
the answer to that, Jason.
So, but the question, it's sort of like it's not even a trick question, because I heard a talk from there's a guy, Sam Vaknin, who is a controversial character, but also a psychologist and a big researcher and so on. So he did this talk, which is like, you are nothing, right? And you will never change. You are who you are. That's it. Just accept it, and then so on. And so there has to be an element of truth to that, but I refuse to take it as all the truth and nothing but the truth. So it's like, I'm always working on balancing out the idea that you can't change and you're always changing. And when you blend those two together, then you get truth. And so the question to you is like, what can't change and what's always changing?
So that's really interesting, and I think that's very true. I mean, from what comes up for me is that time is experienced by us. In effect, time is literally two different states of consciousness. So the consciousness that I am now, as opposed to the consciousness that I am when I'm going to make my my evening meal, I experience the difference between those two states as time. But actually, they are just the states of my being at any time. There is no real sense of a linear progression. So what that guy's saying, in some ways, I'm guessing, is around the fact that actually that can't there's nowhere to get to, right? There is no destination. There is just a series of unfoldings. And so in that sense, if we say I'm not happy until this thing happens, then we're on the hamster wheel, right? Whereas if we just sit and we accept, and we can come into our own being and just say, actually, I'm me, who I am. I am just an expression of whatever I am, and then there is nowhere to get to. So I think that maybe that's what he's saying. I don't know the chap, but that is definitely a powerful thing. There is no destination. There's nowhere to get to. You're not suddenly going to wake up and everything's going to be happy. You don't suddenly get there. But at the same stage, I would also say that having done that work myself, something like gratitude practice, for example, a very simple practice. I know for a fact that if I practice gratitude over let's just say I do 30 days of gratitude practice, every morning, 5 minutes, doesn't need to be long. At the end of those 30 days, I will feel different in some way than I did before I started that practice. Whether that's me shifting and changing permanently, potentially not, but it's an ebb and a flow, right? It's in a flow of my state of being at any time and so in some ways we're probably more like jellyfish being battered around in the sea. In some stage, sometimes we're up and sometimes we're down and sometimes but for me it feels like and certainly from a neurobiological point of view, there are practices that can make you feel calmer. There are practices that can make you feel more connected. You know, we wouldn't do things like yoga. We wouldn't do things like mindfulness. We wouldn't do things like, you know, nonviolent communication if some of these processes didn't help us to navigate the world in some ways better than, you know, maybe it's not permanent change, and maybe that guy's right, but it definitely feels like there are things that I can do that. So, for example, if I was going to go out today and deal with my family by, you know, slapping my daughter and by shouting at my wife and by, you know, just being completely destructive, that's not going to give me a particularly great experience of my day. But if I'm going out with love and with compassion and with, you know, trying to be the best version I can be of myself, then that seems to give myself a little bit more happiness, and certainly seems to make my connections within my family unit and my friends more connected as well, which are my clients, I guess. So,
yeah. So
long-winded answer.
To sort of gently start wrapping it up, where do you see yourself in 25 years time?
Wow. So I am going to be 50 years old on next Wednesday. So 2 weeks, a week and 2 days away. I'm going to be 50. So I have been asking myself that question.
Congratulations.
When you get to 50,
what does it feel like?
Wow.
I'm 39, so
Yeah.
you're sort of 10 years ahead of me. What does it feel like 10 years from now?
For you, I think it's going to feel amazing, Jason. I've just got a feeling. For me, it's terrible. What does it feel like 50 years? I don't know. It's interesting, isn't it?
A guy I used to hang around with, I used to call him friend, but he ended up sort of disappearing out of my life a long time ago. He would be this kind of like facetious kind of guy, and he said, you know, he's like 15 years older than me or whatever. And I was like, oh, I got this like backache or something. You know, I was 20 something at the time. And he goes, don't worry, it only gets worse from here on. But it's so yeah. What's it like to be 50, and what's it going to be like to be 75?
Yeah, I think so. I think probably the sense of what my biggest awareness, I think, over is probably a sense of recognizing how unimportant I am in the universe. A sense of understanding that as I'm aging, my sense of self is becoming less. My sense of how important I am and my needs and my Andre-ness is less of an issue than when I was in my 30s. I think I can be more expansive maybe and less totally into myself. At 35, I was completely into myself, absorbed. I think as you go through doing, you know, maybe a bit more introspection, that sort of stuff, you start to recognize, actually, I don't feel as that introspection has opened up a little bit. I don't feel as sort of that sort of self-important. And I don't mean that as a judgment, but I think we all have to go through that process of moving through that egoic sort of stages of processing our own development. And so now at 50, I think it's a wonderful age to be. I think have you got children, Jason?
Yeah, I've got a 13-year-old boy and an 8-year-old daughter.
Yeah. So we just got one daughter who's sort of becoming much more independent, mid-teens. But that whole role of being a parent has started to, you know, shift in its dynamics, and they're still very much a parent, but that's sort of shifting. You know, I have an elderly parent. My mum's around, so there's a chance of taking on that role of being, you know, being caregiver for her. And so it's just a lot about shifting relationships and shifting awareness of yourself. What happens in 25 years, I'd like to think that I have made some small imprint on helping as many people as possible to have become more aware of an embodiment process within them, more of a sort of introspective process to recognize that maybe they're a bit more in control than they think they are of what's going on in their mind and their body. In 25 years, I hope I'm a grandfather. You know, I hope I'm still working. I'm hoping I've still got clients. You know, when I was an osteopath, I was training. I didn't train in this school, but there was a training school just down the way in London. It was down in Eastbourne, I think, or something like that. And the guy was called John Wernham, and he was still practicing as an osteopath when he was 94.
Wow.
Still seeing 4 or 5 clients a day,
Yeah.
and or maybe 4 or 5 clients a week actually at that stage.
Yeah.
But yeah, just that sort of, I don't see a point where I'm working and then I'm going to be,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
retired, and
Yeah.
it doesn't feel like that. It just feels like a natural, like I'm lucky, and maybe you are, Jason, as well. I do this work. I'm lucky enough to do work that I would do for free, and
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that I'm going to do it for free.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
But you know what I
yeah.
mean.
We saw Karate Kid last night again as a family, and I haven't seen that
Yeah,
movie for
great.
so long, and it was like, man, that
The
Mr.
original one.
Miyagi. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Mr.
I
Miyagi.
was like that
Yeah.
Mr. Miyagi. It's like it's weird how like those kind of characters leave an imprint, right? It's like everyone remembers Mr. Miyagi, but it was like now I rewatched that as a 39-year-old. I was like, man, that like Mr. Miyagi is really cool guy. You know, it's like cooler than I ever even thought before. I kind of see Mr. Miyagi a lot more kind of like integratively now. Uh, okay. And so, you know, just sharing with anyone who hears this, you know, what is your, let's say, what's your wish for humanity going forward, and how can people find you? Who are you looking for?
It's a big one. The wish for humanity. I think this is probably a year ago. It would probably be a changed answer in some ways. I think the last year has probably been the most turbulent year for anyone born after the Second World War, I would think.
Yeah, ever. Yeah.
Apart from if you've lived in, you know, yeah, I shouldn't really say that, because obviously there are people in horribly war-torn areas around the world who are
Yeah.
having, you know, disaster.
Well, I mean,
But for the Western world,
I've been through war in Bosnia for 3
okay,
years, and in many respects, this thing was a lot more shocking. And this is where how like weird how mind plays games, right? Because when I was in the war in Bosnia, I was 11 to 14 years of age, right? And that was a while back. So it goes back to the trauma thing. It's like, well, do you suffer from trauma from 25, 30 years ago more than you suffer from something that's right now hitting your bank account, hitting your freedom, hitting and probably the answer is probably this thing right now, because it's more like actuated, right? And this is like the first time that I've experienced something, and everyone keeps saying this, that it's like first time global thing that's like affected everyone.
yes,
And then so I'd actually class that as worse than being
yeah,
literally in the war. Yeah.
yeah, okay, interesting. Yeah, I
because
think,
because when you're in the war locally, you're so like, well, if I get out of the war zone, it's going to be better. But here it's like there's no getting out. This is a
yeah,
planetary pandemic, right?
yeah, and planetary political upheaval as well,
All
which
that
is
economic and
going, yeah,
physical,
economic, and
everything. Yeah.
yeah, um, yeah, and so my hope would be that we can find a way forward to reconcile differences, to understand each other, just to be more tolerant, to really get the understanding that what the other's experience is like, rather than just thinking my experience is better than yours and I'm going to tell you what to do. Right, actually understanding what the other person's experience is like, and just trying to, you know, I really hope and I believe that there is a raising of consciousness in humanity in general, and I think that is coming to a head with what's going on around us, you know, as we see that around us. And I think that's my sort of gut understanding of it. So that would be my desire, but just we start to become more tolerant, more loving to each other, more just trying to be more sort of connected with each other, try to understand the other person's viewpoint, try to smile, try to laugh, try to, you know, just be connected with people, and stay healthy.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And what kind of people are you looking for, and where can they
Yeah,
find you?
my business is called Resilient Executives. So I work with, generally work with professionals and business owners who are struggling with anxiety, who are struggling with being burnt out, who are struggling in, you know, in difficult working conditions, work situations. And so it's resilientexecutives.com. My, basically, if you go online, you can get in touch with me there. And you can make an appointment just to have a sort of an hour long 50-minute chat with me and see what's going on for you. Yeah, and I'm on LinkedIn and on Andre Duquemin, my weird name, which I'm sure Jason will put on the notes somewhere.
Yeah.
My weird northern Brittany, northern France name. But yeah.
Awesome.
Andre
Thank you so
Duquemin.
much. Awesome chat. I really
Jason,
enjoyed
it's been really
that.
nice to chat to you. I love. I mean, the fact we end up talking about scissors and
Yeah, it's
all that sort of
always
stuff.
because I'm like such a stickler for like clean hands, and so
Yeah.
if I don't have like a hand kit, I literally got the whole hand kit, like the whole thing.
Yeah,
It's
cool.
like that drives anxiety in me. If I don't have it, it's like someone took my hand kit.
Yeah. Where is it? Bring it back. But no, it's been a pleasure to chat to you, and yeah, and
Thank you
thanks
so
for
much.
yeah, great.
All the best.
Cheers.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.